I'm Sherra Palmer, and I'm here to introduce you to the women who did this wonderful work in this room. They were either friends of my mother's, relatives that were in the family, but all of them are long gone now, and I want their stories to be told. So this exhibit is not about me, it's about them, and I picture them looking down and smiling that the work of their hands is being seen again. Thank you. I intend to narrate their stories from the pieces that I have printed out of their stories so that I get the words just right. Otherwise, I would do it from scratch, but I think this will work better. Quilted Comfort. The quilts and quilting of family and friends of Sherra L. and T. David Palmer. Is there a treasured quilt in your past, present, or future? Layers of fabric melded together by sturdy threads and fine needles to create quilts with patterns known by many names, sewn into rainbows and gardens of color. Americans took this needle art and carried it to new heights, blending their need for economy, utility, and beauty into an art form admired by the world. The quilts and accessories you will see today are not of particular value. Only one of them is to be donated to a public collection here in Connecticut due to its value and its age. Almost without fail, the others are created from the 20s to the 1970s in the Midwest or in the South. They are all part of my personal collection of textiles, and most are the work of older family members or older friends who have passed on. They are entrusted to me, along with their patterns, templates, and tools, for they saw me as a younger custodian of the work of their hands. I was honored, and I am honored still by their trust. I'm now in my 70s and have begun to think of not only my own future, but the future of the creations of the women of my past. Some of these quilts are lovely, some are only beloved. All I willingly share with you, for I am here to tell their story, not my own. These are the memories of my great-grandmother, Mary Larkin Hall Brim. She died in 1962, a woman of great courage. She was a cripple and had 2 crutches from the time she was a small girl. Today it might have been diagnosed as polio. No one will ever know what caused it. But Grandma Brim had a large family, and she did extra things to get money. She made crepe paper flowers. I have her quilting book. I have the address that she was last located on. They're within this case. And next thing that I will do is to read about the one quilt in my collection that is hers. Thank you. Grandma Brim's Texas Star Quilt. This grand quilt of many colors was the last that my great-grandmother made before her death in 1962, only hours after the birth of my son, making 5 generations, however brief. Both her poverty and attitude of make do or do without led her to make use of fabrics given to her in exchange for sale of her chickens' fresh-laid eggs, or for piecing a top for a neighbor, or for making of her famous crepe paper flowers, which townspeople used to decorate the graves of their loved ones. Mary Brim was part Cherokee Indian and proud of it. She raised and nurtured 14 children, some sets of twins, some living, some dead, in a tiny 3-room house not far from the Trail of Tears that an ancestor must have forced marched earlier in the 19th century. As her eldest great-grandchild, this quilt as a top came into my hands. My husband's mother, Jessie, used it as the vehicle to teach me, her much less talented daughter-in-law, to stitch it into the quilt you see here today. Connecticut history in patchwork. After our Revolutionary War, but not too far into the 19th century, someone living near Salem, Connecticut, was stitching fabric together to create this old quilt. It is composed of hand-blocked red prints and early roller prints of a lion, chariot, and famous founders. The backing was woven on an early loom, taking more time than you or I would ever want to contemplate. I was a lucky person, and I found this piece of New England history for $105 in a small collectibles shop in Salem, Connecticut. The Connecticut Historical Society has asked that it be donated to fill a gap in their collection of quilts. It will be the only one of my quilts to be so honored. This quilt cost me only a couple of $100, yet I paid what was asked. How so? This is called Stars Within Stars. Years ago, while attending a rummage and bake sale to benefit a church in West Hartford, I spied this large orange and white quilt with matching crocheted pillow slips. It was to be sold to the highest silent bidder. I, who could not win a door prize if only one other person was present, decided to make a reasonable bid, high enough to not be insulting, yet low enough to suit my pocketbook. At the end of the day, a phone call told me it was mine. I was thrilled. In my mind, I had already placed it on my four-poster bed with white linen dust ruffle and feather pillows tucked into the slips. I sped to the scene expecting smiles, congratulations from all corners of the room, and a thank you very much, to which I intended to express my pleasure at being the lucky recipient of such a lovely work of art. Instead, I was handed this lovely, without a word or smile, except for a nearby spectator in the church who said, "She sure got that for nothing." Did it spoil my pleasure? Dampen my spirits? Oh, maybe just a smidge, or possibly a tad. This is the entirety of my books on quilting that are in my personal library at home. I tell you that I'm not much of a quilter. I'm a decent needle worker, but I love books, and so I brought the books to the exhibit so that people would sit in an old rocking chair nearby and hopefully go through the past and think about the possessions that were left to them from their elders. Thank you. This case is filled with the memories that I have, at least some of them, of my beloved Jessie Shims, my mother-in-law. She was very special to me, and I hope that I was to her. She is the smallest child that you see represented in the picture in the back. The little shoe belonged to her. She's represented as a 17-year-old in the center picture. Her scissors, called stork scissors, that were her pride and joy, are there as well. And she, during her later years, also there, with her work basket at the top that's made out of silk that she carried with her. She was very special. She was born in 1908, and during her birth, her mother died, and while she was dying in those first few early hours, mother was kept alive by being placed in a shoebox that belonged to her grandfather, who had a small kind of general store across the street. He'd sent someone rushing across to get a shoebox and line it with warm flannel. They placed the baby, which was about a pound, in it, and put the lid down on the oven of the coal stove or the wood stove, and she resided there as her mother died. She lived to be in her 80s and was spry and always a sassy person, so she started in a tough way and she ended tough as well. Mother's Poppy Quilt. My beloved mother-in-law and friend, Sherra Palmer Shims, created this quilt in all its brilliant color. She made many such, preferring applique and often relying on intricate quilt kits with pre-cut pieces to speed the process. She was always rushing through life as an emergency room nurse, and quilting was her peaceful place. Mother created the simple and beautiful, but always looked forward to the day when she could consider herself adept enough to attempt an all-white counterpane. She passed away before that day came, but the sight of these red poppies in my home is a wonderful reminder of her vibrant personality and love for me and mine, her son. wedding ring with bright orange blocks interspersed with purple lining. My husband slept under and remembers this quilt from his childhood. He saw rough wear from him and his visiting friends. He was a real boy, unafraid by use of pink and purple in the textiles that always covered every bed in his mother's house. The quilt disappeared when he was about 14 years old. He remembers its loss only because it accompanied a tragedy in his eyes. One day he returned from school to find that in his absence, his forceful mother had herself sawed the high post end off of his beloved twin bed. He was tall enough by then that he could rest his feet against the high wooden spindle design called the Jenny Lind at the foot of the bed. The wooden piece was already gone, already discarded in the alley behind the garage, and the sawdust was cleaned up. The old quilt enjoyed by many of his friends just disappeared, replaced by a modern bed and a chenille bedspread. Quilters never throw things away that are the work of their hands. Years later, when she left this earth and the work of cleaning out the house began, this old boyhood treasure came to light, where she had stashed the too good to use and the too tatty to be seen in a deep and dark overhead storage cabinet near the ceiling of her bedroom. Jessie's Star Flower Picot Quilt. My husband's mother, Jessie Palmer Shims, created this lovely, brilliant sea of color as a gift for us. We treasure it as a work of her art, and for all the hundreds of hours her fingers and tiny tween needles and delicate stork-shaped scissors labored over it. Strangely, the thing she valued most about it and consumed the least of her time in my mind, for she would ever say, "Did you see those picot points I made for the edge? That was hard." Tree of Life? Question mark. This applique quilt was created by Jessie Shims. It is her usual perfect work. I'm uncertain of the pattern name. She just always called it the Tree of Life. That's going to be good enough for me. The Flowered Daisy Quilt. Can there be any doubt that this is a quilt kit of the early 1960s? It screams it in print selection and color. The words "Creation by Busilla" probably could still be found under the lining, yet it is beautifully appliqued with tiny stitches hidden ever so nicely. I remember when this particular quilt entered through the back door of my beloved mother-in-law Jessie's house. It was enveloped in a large garbage bag, packed tight, with sheet backing, pre-stamped top, fiber fill, and what looked like, to my 20-year-old eyes, thousands of scraps of colored fabric that someone would have to make into flowers and leaves. It was a discard gained at cents on the dollar from her near neighbors, maiden sisters who purchased new and never finished their projects. In 1960 spring, followed by summer and fall, Jessie spent in a green rocker on a screened-in porch in the heartland, stitching hour after hour. A tiny, curled-haired grandson sat watching her every move, every stitch that she took. That's why at her death, years later, this quilt, of all the beauties she possessed, was chosen by that little boy, now a man, to be his own. It is more precious than rubies to him. Nine Patch. This brilliant 9-patch is a favorite of mine, rather small, with 63 patches of vivid color. All of you quilters know that this is the simplest form a quilt can take. Yet these 9 patches seem to leap off the white ground with tiny even stitches, carefully drawn pencil lines still visible around templates, cardboard or sandpaper that many will recognize from peeking into Grandma's sewing box many years ago. This is a Pennsylvania quilt, found at a large flea market. The maker's name is lost to us, yet I like to imagine that during a cold, wet, foggy winter's day, a gray-haired lady of a certain age felt the need for sunshine and blue skies, so she picked up her needle and created this tops bit of brightness in short order, but labored long to carefully draw the template lines and quilt them finely. At last, a frame was needed to hold all the sunshine and sky she had wrought, so she bound the edges to hold it all inside. This quilt was unused when purchased, Ergo, my imagination tells me she is older rather than young, for a young woman would never have let it go for the pittance paid. She is most probably no longer among the living as well, for if that were so, it would have remained where it had lain, inside the cedar chest of early marriage, wrapped in clean white cotton. Bless you, whoever you are. The work of your hands is loved again. This is a collection of items from my attic, which I refer to as my crafts area. I keep in my possession all the fabrics that I would need to start a new and creative project. I also keep all the patterns that have been given to me by old ladies, their daughters, and their granddaughters through the years that would have been normally thrown away or put in the trash barrel and burned at their deaths. I also look for patterns of quilts and pieces of quilts and patches at tag sales that would never have been finished. Not that I finish them, but I keep them. And if anyone ever wants to do a sunbonnet Sue or a star or a flower, I'm prepared to give it so that they have the ability to proceed on their work. Quilt with vivid red background. This is the work of the Sisters Shims of Nauvoo, Alabama. Colorful, a standout. Probably covered many a bed over the years that the sisters lived, loved, and worked in a small, close-knit community of family and friends. My husband remembers trips in the mid-1950s where following breakfast all adjourned to the porch and to a cemetery where Confederate Decoration Day was observed. Local clergy offered prayers and good words about all those buried. Many were family members long dead. Help me identify the pattern using the large paper-backed quilt book on the table nearby. Oh, and aside, someone from the museum has found out the pattern name. Let's go see. The glorified 9-patch. Now you are identified. This little piece of work in this great big room is my work. I know that I am a better researcher in certain areas of American history than I am a needleworker. But I have accumulated some things that I hope that my family enjoys through the years, and it's been a pleasure to do it. But I have the smallest section of all in this large room, and that suits me fine. This is the work of my friend, local woman named Kathy Leary. Every time something wonderful or tragic would happen in my adult life and my friendship with her, she would do a piece of quilting for me. In contrast to my own work, she is meticulous, has a wonderful color sense, and I wanted to bring these things to honor my friend. There is a small patch here that represents my dog that we had had for 14 years that passed. She wanted to talk about that, so she did it in stitches. I am a book person, so she made something for me that has books on it. Then we did a wonderful tea together to honor the women who had done the Farmington Quilt, so therefore a teacup. And then I was going to Saudi Arabia to live, and she did something for my kitchen. Then she said, I love you on Valentine's Day, and she did an I love you red patch. And then beautiful things have followed. This table represents the oldest things in my collection. And I say on this table, surely beauty is more than skin deep, because they are not in good condition. Many of them are from the final decade of the 18th century. Some of them show the cotton seeds that were used to stuff the particular block. But I keep them because someone loved these once upon a time, and we need to review that beauty that they once had. Above that, you will find a poster of the Farmington quilt that's very famous in Connecticut that hangs in our main library in the village. I was presented with it many years ago when I was selected to be the friend of the Libraries of Connecticut for the year, a great honor for me. I've also represented up there a large desk that goes over the arms of the chair that will show that you won't be able to see, but that does show many marks from a quilter making all kinds of cutting marks on it in order to get her work done. At the very low part of that is a bright red and yellow small, and I emphasize small because I don't have the patience for larger, piece of work that I did in my past. Cobweb in white and black. This quilt has seen better days. It first saw the light of day in the hands of either Isidore Sims Yates or her sister, Martha Sims Muskelly, in Nauvoo, Alabama. Both were elderly when I came into the family, but it was a family of many children, so I am certain that this simple design in practical colors saw much service and deserves and enjoys the title of Tattered but Proud. Isidore was tall, skinny, olive-skinned with a pointed nose and snappy black-brown eyes and hair to match, hair always in a bun. Her words were as sharp as her accent was Southern, and everyone knew where she stood. She took no guff, suffered no fools. Sister Martha was her opposite in every way. Beloved by all, soft-spoken, softly rounded, with blue eyes, blonde white hair, and fair skin. You can imagine that she was everyone's best friend. I never heard her utter a harsh word. They were inseparable, a team, one tiny house, an unbreakable bond. The Sister Sims quilt. Each time I see this quilt, I think once again of those distant relatives, sisters born in the twilight years of the 19th century, living out their long and fruitful lives and years in a tiny log house in rural Alabama. Visits South always included a sermon by the circuit preacher in the tiny country church where shaped note singing was presented, raising the rafters with joyful sound, and every dawn beginning with the smell of hot biscuit wafting from the kitchen as men folks and gas sat in rocking chairs on the front porch till called to eat. Martha and Isidore Sims worked hard, raised children, but always saved time to sit, to visit, to take snuff, and create quilts. Often more utilitarian than beautiful. Many patterns. The bow tie, the spider web that used every scrap, all passed through their hands. They mended the worn, accepted the cast-off clothing of neighbors by piecing scraps, and stitched their plain, spoken, sincere way of life into every quilt. Their like will not be seen again. Bow tie with bright pink backing. This quilt shows the work of two families of women. Often the Illinois Yankees would piece a top during their winter, yet put off the quilting. They knew that the Sister Sims in a small house in a small town of Nauvoo, Alabama, would take much time and small stitches for small change and do the finishing. If a trip south by auto was not planned, the post office on each end of the journey was entrusted with the quilt. I do remember one comment my mother-in-law Jessie made when this quilt arrived back home in Illinois. Isidore and Martha must be getting too old, since these stitches are not good. This exhibit case is furnished with stencils that are from quilters of the past. Their names are there, the lock of hair that belongs to one of them is there, the sunglasses are there, and it's accompanied by other things that I have found through the years, including a pink pincushion that has a flower on top that is an 18th century piece of French work. The quilt atop that is called the Pinwheel with Diamonds and Double Wedding Ring. It's a long story, but it's interesting. I keep promising myself to put a tiny permanently stitched tag on this quilt saying, "Made in China." You see, I am ambivalent about their loveliness, enjoying the use while promising unspoken to make certain that any future owner beyond my years will not mistake it for an American quilt brought across the American prairies by a young bride or pieced at a quilting in Appalachia. Yet like every person or object, they too have a story to tell. My husband travels to a few places in the world that have not yet been my pleasure to see. Yet when he finally unpacks his luggage in our Farmington home once again, he always has brought me a memento, a gift, a recalling, so that I can share his adventures. Here is his story and their story. The Great Wall of China outside Beijing is often a series of steep steps with landings and lookouts abounding. The common people are allowed to sell their produce and crafts from their assigned place on the wall. In the case of quilts, the ladies dressed in traditional clothing, mandarin collar, tunic, and pants, choose to display their wares by hanging them unfurled over the side of the wall. What a sight that must have been. Piece of home, so far from home for him. Do not think that it's easy on me that these quilts were handmade by row upon row of women and girls. Some were cutting, some piecing, some pressing, others quilting. Yet I have lived and traveled much in the countries of the world where there is no dishonor or feeling of being exploited when doing an honest job at a local rate of pay. Actually, this work is well appreciated and often sought. Sweatshop is an American word, not a Chinese one, nor an Indian or Pakistani or Egyptian or Filipino one. I choose to think of the beauty of the colors, the distance they have traveled to find me, the love of the man who gifted them to me. Do I think they were too much of a bargain at $55 each? Yes. And even though I will have them always, I do think I'll add a little tag with a disclaimer, made in China in 1995. The Quilt of Pink Painted Roses. Grandma Nettie Burkett of Christopher, Illinois, painted this quilt at a very advanced age. Her daughter, Ermelie, friend to my mother, saw the need to keep Grandma occupied. Nettie's many talents for fashioning and embroidering the clothing of her two children many years before were long lost in her memories. Her daughter, ever devoted, purchased one of the new paint markers and put Nettie to work. I believe this was her final endeavor. I was entrusted with keeping it safe and have done so proudly. Aunt Maudie's Flower Basket Quilt. My husband David's Aunt Maudie created this quilt and many others during the years she spent as a midnight to dawn watcher at what was commonly called an insane asylum in our age. The needlework you see in light shades of green with flowers in soft colors is the most lively of all that she stitched. Most were somber and darker hued, as were her surroundings and her human charges all those years ago. Pastel stars with pale pink backing. This quilt is a favorite of mine, Maudie Armstrong Lehman. Its maker had a wonderful color sense, much more soothing than Grandma Brim's work that I showed you earlier, or even my darling Jessie's. Her colors did not jump, they walked softly. She had no children, and therefore time was hers to spend as she chose. She chose to spend it creating beauties like this. I have already told you about her job as a watcher she had at the State Insane Asylum at Anna, Illinois. This quilt must have taken extra time and planning, many stitches, subtle colors. It is a field of calm when placed across my queen-size bed. 6-point stars with beige background. I know this was a family quilt. I believe this was the work of Maudie Armstrong Lehman because of the exceptional stitching and coloration. She was a perfectionist. I do know that it graced our own bed for many years and that its coloration was perfect for all surroundings in the many homes we have had the years of our 56-year marriage. The Octagon Star. Pale yellow print, faded blue and white. Simplistic coloration, not easy to piece. Top stitches that seem to vary in skill from place to place, as though sewn by many or more than one. Faded glory, I called it, yet I know that it was my husband's Aunt Maudie who did all the work in the 30s. She was that watcher I told you about, that almost nursed who worked through the night in the asylum. Mostly she sat in a chair in the hallway, listening for distress and watching for trouble that sometimes came. I'm certain that this quilt began life with vivid color. Aunt would use no remade fabrics that had seen better days as a shirt, a dress, or an apron. with no children herself and a husband who brought home his pay. She was allowed certain privileges of buying yard goods that her sister Jessie did not have. The unevenness of the stitches is comparison to the precision of the piecing. It makes me wonder if there were nights of ease, producing fine work, and nights of stress, bringing carelessness. I only know that when Aunt Maudie died an untimely death, her sister Jessie was made to purchase, not received by gift, every piece her sister's hands had ever wrought. Jessie cared for those quilts as if they were made of gold, not to be washed, just air-dried. Why then, years later, at her own death, was only this one quilt found, faded with washing, and laid sandwiched between her mattress and the steel bed springs as if a dust protector? There is a story here, dearest Jessie. Whisper and tell me what it is. This is an assemblage of pieces that I have at the exhibit. The top is a quilt square and stamps that was created for the bicentennial in 1976. My husband, always watchful for a gift for me, found this, brought it home. It's hung on a wall in my buttery ever since. In the middle, you'll find a large case of tools and places to place the needles and the pins so they won't rust that I have collected over time. Some old and valued and some from the 1970s and made of plastic, all valuable to me. In the bottom, you'll see two examples of the way women started their quilts. One is the pieced top. It is also a Texas star, but is to be finished by someone other than me. Behind that, you'll find what an applique quilt begins its life as, without all the colorful patches that it will receive later. This small case contains darning eggs that I have found in all parts of the United States through the years. Some show almost no use at all. Others show that they have been well worked over the years. I like to look at them and try to imagine what woman, or man maybe in the case of a tailor, used these, because they're all prized now. Tools of the trade. These are things, some from women that you have seen their work, others that I have found through the years, and some the thimbles and the thimbles of others, but my own thimbles as well. I wanted to show you some of the things that adorn the shelves in my house that remind me of the past and remind me of these women so special to me. These machines, these two machines, are compact, lightweight, and ready for work away from home. They are still used today by many quilters that are going to a convention, they're going to a quilting group, they want something small, yet tough enough to do the job. They are rather pricey these days when you try to find one, because I'm not certain they're still made. But the featherweight and the featherlight are here to do their work. This is Sherra Palmer finishing my talk. I hope you've enjoyed all the work of the hands that you have seen. I think we have pleased all these women in my past. Every one of you out there has women in their past, men in their past, but you don't want them to be forgotten. This is the way that you make them live again and find their lives. Thank you so much.